I sure am.
All right. Welcome to our member call on how to look at a form. Over to you, Carolyn.
So, hello everybody. I'm delighted to see such a large number of people coming to talk to this arcane topic of forms that sometimes I think I'm the only person interested in it. But as it just happened yesterday, my husband was trying to register on a website and he turned to me in despair and said, to put in my date of birth, this website wants me to click the previous month button 840 times. So suffice to say, he wasn't very happy about it. So there's some things that we can make our forms better. And I'm going to share with you a quick technique. All my slides are Creative Commons licensed. You're very welcome to use them as you wish, simply provided that you requote the Creative Commons license on them. So the idea here is something that you might want to use in a meeting or yourselves, and I hope you'll find it useful. So we'll have a go. We're going to look at a form together. I've chosen just a straightforward form, probably rather simple, but it gives us some ideas. And then I'm going to give you some tips about how to look at your own forms and a brief idea about what to do to improve your forms. So Yanis just mentioned raising your hand. What we're going to do is we're going to try to pay for a parking ticket. I've chosen paying for a parking ticket in central Bedfordshire, where I happen to live, in the middle of the UK. And I'm going to ask everybody if you would mind to do the raise hand thing on the list, so I can see everyone's hand going up. If you all know how to do that, because I can't see everyone's picture at the same time. Great, everyone's got their hand raised. I think most people. Everyone feels fairly confident. I'm assuming the AI note takers won't raise their hands, but that's absolutely fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to step through the journey I did on my mobile to try and get to the place where I had to pay a parking ticket. And I'd like everybody to just keep a note mentally or write something down of the page number that you consider to be the form. If you have any other comments, that's absolutely fine as well. So off we go. I'm going to pause for a while to give you a chance to have a look at the page, probably a little bit more slowly than you do this in real life, but it's going to be fairly small because it's on a phone. So here we go. I found the website by searching for central beds. I'd give you a chance to look at the page I got and think very quickly about whether you feel that's the form yet. If you think it's the form page, I'm going to get you to lower your hand. Okay, so what I did was I look at that page and I thought, well, actually, I'm going to scroll. This is what I got when I scrolled. I'll give you a chance to look at that page. I'm thinking about paying a parking fine. If we think that one's the form page, then I'll get you to lower your hands. You may or may not. It's entirely up to you. There's no right or wrong answers here, by the way. It's just how it strikes you. So I thought, okay, parking fines, I'm going to click on that. So this is the page I got next. Does this page 3, does that seem like the form to you? If you think it's the form page, I'll get you to lower your hand. Again, no right or wrong answers, it's just how it strikes you. Okay, so quite small. I appreciate it is quite small. I looked at that page and thought, okay, it's the right sort of page, paying parking fines. I'll scroll. And so I scrolled again. This is the page that I got then. Is this page the form? That's again, right or wrong answer. Doesn't matter. You think it's the form, then lower your hand. And then I clicked on pay parking fine, and then I got to this page. And does that feel like the form to you? If you think so, then I'll get you to lower your hands. I'm sorry, the text is very small. So I think some people are still thinking about it. but I'm seeing quite a few hands going down. So I think generally by now, most people feel that we've probably got to the form. I'm going to just ask somebody who hasn't yet decided we've got to the form, why they think we're not at the form yet.
Jam, do you want to say why you don't think this is the form?
Because I don't think that we've found our individual specific situation yet. I think we're just at the finding the ticket form before the form.
So we're kind of in so as Jam said, that's a form before the form. So it looks a bit like a form, but is it the form yet? Not necessarily. But there's a bit more of quite a few people did decide to lower their hand at this page. So perhaps I could ask somebody who decided that we've got to the form now, why you felt it looked like we got to the form. Maybe I could just ask Andre. I think you chose this page as the one that looked like a form to you.
Sure. I mean, it asks for the user's input. So maybe it's not the form, like the ultimate form, but it feels like a form.
It feels like a form. So that's a very interesting distinction. Like I said, thank you for your contributions. There are no right or wrong answers here. I've just picked 3 of the pages out in the journey, the one that we arrived at, and some people would say, well, it's not the form, but it's a form. It looks like a form because there's some stuff to type into and there's some questions and answer thing going on there. Another one, some people may have chosen, I'm not quite sure. I'll get you to lower your hands if you haven't so far, just so that Yanis knows if there's an actual extra question coming in. Yeah, thanks for that. Sorry? Was there a question at that point?
I think that was just background noise.
Just background. Okay, so we've got the one on the left, which has got that sort of looks like a form thing going on. There's some question answer spaces. The one in the middle has got some instructions about the form. Some people, I think, may have reckoned that is good enough. That's like instructions about what you have to do is also part of the form. And then we've got the home page on the right, which is arguably something that's part of the form as well. I'm going to just think about that whole thing about we know a form when we see it. So I think we all agreed that the one I ended up on was a form, whether or not it was the form was perhaps the question. And so we know that it's a form because it looks like a form and works like a form. But it's also a form because it's asking some questions and expecting some answers. There's some kind of dialogue going on. And that sort of dialogue about the form starts when people reach the instructions of the form. And then finally, it's there because it's allowing someone to achieve a goal. Now, I am the form specialist. I do weird things like hunting around for forms just because I'm interested in forms. I even collect forms jokes, of which I found 3 or 4 in the last 20 years. But normal people don't do that. Normal people only use a form when they're actually trying to do something. Either they're responding to something an organization has made them do, or there's something they need to do. In my case, I made up the goal of trying to pay for a parking ticket. So there's some sort of purpose to a form. And so a form really allows someone to achieve a goal. And one of the reasons I'm really interested in forms is because forms need a lot of different sorts of design, and I really enjoy all of them. So, it needs good interaction design. It needs good accessibility, as we've talked about, in terms of can you actually read it with a screen reader? I noticed that the font size on that final screen was really terrible. So people were peering at it. It probably wasn't good enough in terms of accessibility. We need good interaction design. We also need good content design. People have to understand what they're reading and be able to act on it. They have to be able to understand the questions and thinking about the answers. And it's there for a purpose. So we need good service design. We need to find out whether people can do what they set out to do. So it's a combination of all of those which makes it so interesting. Now, as we worked through, you may or may not have noticed some problems in interaction design. I mean, just for example, Why are these two buttons different? So on page 4, we had a narrow button, which looked, in my mind, quite buttony. On page 5, we had a wider button, and at a glance, you might have thought that was part of the branding because it's the same width as the purple branding at the top of the page, but it's the only thing that plausibly looks like a button, so it'll probably work as a button. Why are they different? Is there any rationale for it? Actually, I know why they're different, and it's because in common, I believe, I don't know anything about this, I haven't worked with Central Bedfordshire Council, but it's very common in this country for local authorities to buy in systems for dealing with certain transactions. And I'm just guessing that the team that has written page 4 is probably part of the council, and the team that's built the tool used for page 5 is probably bought in. And that's why we've got these slight inconsistencies and slightly worse buttons. So that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. It's just really common. So it's just an example of something we might have noticed for interaction design. And if you looked at the content design, I didn't really give you a chance to really think about it, but you may or may not have spotted that we actually changed name. So on page 4, we were looking for paying parking fines, and we clicked a button called Pay Parking Fines. By the time we got to page 5, we were on something called PCN Details. Now, I would like to say, well done, Central Bedfordshire Council, because the PCN is the technical name for this. But personally, and you might think differently, by the time I got to PCN, I had got the idea that PCN was something to do with parking fine, whether I really noticed or not, but I felt I was on the right track. And I'm quite impressed by that, because the last time I tried to do paying a parking fine on a few local government websites in the UK, it was about 10 years ago, and it was really hard to actually find how to do it because you had to know the technical term PCN, whereas here they've actually tried to use the everyday term parking fine and get us to it. Those sort of jargon things happen all the time, and it's worth thinking about in your own forms. And then finally, you might say, well, when I went to the front page of the service design really starts at the home page. You might say, well, actually, you just stick parking fine into Google, but you might not. You might decide to start from the home page. And we should always try and support people who, for some bizarre reason, trust our home pages more than their search engine. And so it's like, well, okay, there's this massive great thing that's nothing to do with what I needed to do. But that, again, that seemed reasonable to me, that actually at the moment in this country, we have a cost of living crisis. That's it's salient and important. And they've accounted for that priority within a scroll. So again, I would say well done to Central Bedfordshire on that. But it just shows we had a journey through, and there was quite a lot to learn. And then, you know, one of the things I wanted to mention to you is that we saw Central Beds Council, good or bad, through the lens of those 5 screens. You know, what was going on was invisible to us. All we saw was the forms on the outside. And so it's might seem that that's only part of the thing, but that's the bit that the users most typically see, so it's worth getting them right. Now, what did that journey through the forms tell us? Well, partly it told us that a good form, I think, starts with user and business needs. We need to know why people are filling in and why we're making them fill it in. But from that, we should find out what answers do we genuinely need. And from that, we should find out what questions we want to ask. And we should be trying to build them from the top down rather than the other way up, I think. And then it's going to work well across all the layers. It's got to be easy to read and easy to use. And quite a lot of our accessibility comes at that point. Like, can somebody who's using assistive technology actually get through it? But there's also easy to understand and to answer. And I passionately believe that accessibility is not just about, I mean, clearly making things that someone who uses a screen reader can use is absolutely crucial. I don't want to diminish that at all. But there are far more people who have various sorts of cognitive difficulties, and trying to make things easy to understand for someone who might have a cognitive impairment or someone who might have a temporary impairment. So one of the ways of creating cognitive impairments in our users is by being bureaucratic and difficult to deal with, putting people under stress, and voila, they start to have cognitive impairments. So some of the accessibility comes in at that point. And then accessibility also comes in the service design. What are they trying to do? How important is it in their lives? Are we putting up any barriers to people who might have access needs, for example, in getting it done? So they come in all of those things. You might say, you know, it's very nice to know how to look at a form. Will give you these different aspects of it. But how would you take this looking at a form and actually putting it into life in your own forms? Well, one of the things that I do is I get people to, when I run that sort of run through thing with an organization's forms in general, what I often ask them to do is to write a short story about who the user might be and why they're actually coming to the form. And then we just step through it together, just like that, to see how it's working page by page. It might seem it's simple. Is it simplistic? Maybe. Is it powerful? Yes, because often teams have not actually sat down and just tried to use the thing step by step and noticed what they've noticed. I then challenge us to say, well, has anyone here actually had a parking ticket recently? You don't need to answer that. Your parking problems are your own responsibility. Is there anyone like me who actually lives in central Bedfordshire? Am I the only person on the call? I'm just guessing that I'm the only one. So we're not actual genuine users of the council website. We've been able to put ourselves in the position of being a genuine user, but not necessarily. So another thing to think about is, would my experience have been any different if I had or hadn't been a genuine user? So when I'm asking people to do this in a meeting, I try and get a variety of stories. And for this case, I created some stories about parking tickets. So we have the reckless, naughty driver who doesn't care, just parks everywhere and pays up. So it's a very familiar transaction for them. Then we get the person who has inadvertently parked somewhere with a person with a disability, didn't realize that they can normally park free, but they're in an area they couldn't. They may have a very different view about how to protest about the parking ticket. We didn't look at that route through. I heard a sad story of someone who's in a hurry to get to a funeral, doesn't have a mobile phone, couldn't work out how to pay. Another very difficult story. And then the story that's probably the most familiar to me is, I've lost the actual ticket, but I know I have to pay, which is a story that I have failed many times to get through on council websites. Not because I'm in the habit of getting parking tickets and then being unable to pay, but in the reason that I'm habitually trying to pay for parking tickets where I've not got a parking ticket, and so I've got to try and make something up. Yeah, but that's actually a very difficult one to get through. So there are lots of stories. And what I try and do when I'm doing this in a workshop is ask people to write a short story about why they think someone's using their form, and then challenge them to get a richness and a variety into it. So we're all looking at the form from a different point of view. So if you're looking at your forms yourself, I would say step one is to be realistic about yourself and your users. Think about the service design in relationship. If you're in a meeting or you're doing it on your own, try and actually write just a little once upon a time story that says exactly who you're going to be when you try the form. Being yourself is fine, but acknowledge where you're coming from as well. If you choose to be someone else, take a moment, literally just like 5 seconds is enough to think about how that person is different from you in real life. You know, do I understand the mentality of people who have to pay parking tickets? Probably. Do I understand, for example, the mentality of a teenage boy who's trying to look for his first job? No, know nothing about it. So I'd have to think about that gap. But just try and be one person at a time, have one point of view, and you'll get better results, and then do other stories later. Or if there's a team of you, ask each person to be one very specific person. So that's my first step, really thinking about who's going to use it. My second step is to go through the form being really honest. If you get to a question you don't know the answer, make a note of that, because you're going to try and think about whether a real user would genuinely know the answer or not. If you hit any other difficulty, make a note of it, but don't stop to look around for problems that someone else might have. Just look at your own experience and keep notes. And then finally, once you get to the end, go back and compare notes on everybody. Think about it. Were there any difficulties at different stages? Could you get through? And I found that this has been a very powerful technique in getting people to do things like notice, for example, where they may have instructions, but when they actually try to use the form, they just skip the instructions. So we have to ask ourselves, do you want to get rid of those instructions? Do you want to perhaps turn them into more of a conversation? So there's some sort of question and answer thing going on. What are the consequences of not having those instructions? People typically don't read much in instructions. We have to be realistic about that. So it's quite a powerful but simple process. And then finally, my top tip on how to improve your own forms. It's like, it's all very well looking at them from our point of view. Definitely doing an expert review, which is what we've just been doing, is better than no review. It's also true that many forms are never tested by anyone, even by the person who created them, other than just sort of mechanically seeing if it works. And doing an expert review on a reasonably realistic story is definitely better than that. But I think none of us are actually people who have had to pay for a parking ticket in Bedfordshire. We might not be very accurate about it. So I'll give you an example of what we might see as being problems on forms when we do an expert review. So this is a very old form, which I've used for many years. I don't know if anyone spots any problems on it. I've said that there's a worst problem, so I assume that's told you that that there are a bunch of problems.
Simon, do you want to start? People can also just write in the chat.
Yeah, Simon?
Yeah, the clear form I find problematic.
Okay, so it's an example of a problem. Like the clear form is right where the submit might be. So it could be quite easy to hit clear form instead of submit. Thanks, Simon. One of the problems for me as someone with my particular type of neurodiversity, the fact that asterisk is under the state box and has shoved the state box up, I find very disturbing. And I used to have this form, and I used to get in classes, because I used to say, you know, your required field indicators are not as important as you think they are. Nobody really cares. And in this case, I did choose a required field indicator as a problem. Is it the most severe problem? No, not really. And generally, the workshop would say all sorts of problems. You know, it's very crowded. It's got weird things going on. A whole morass of problems would appear, and generally, the required field indicator wouldn't be the worst one. Now, unbelievably, I once got a genuine user of this form in my workshop. And that user said to me, you're all wrong. The worst problem on this form is that I'm requesting a pre-qualification packet via email, but it's asking me a whole bunch of stuff about my street address. Why is it doing that? Okay. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes much more sense. You know, the goal is a mismatch and they're asking for a bunch of information they don't need. It's work for the user to do it. But more importantly, the organization is storing a bunch of information which it doesn't need, and by the way, it's going to ask for in much more detail later on. Waste of their time to look after it. So it's like getting a genuine user can reveal problems that you didn't even think about, and that's why it's really important to do user research on your form. And then just for amusement, I looked up the form the other day, and it's exactly the same questions. Like the whole form is much more calm, much more legible, but they've done nothing about what my user actually identified as the worst problem on the form. So just a little thought there about forms and stuff. So basically, the main thing to do is to do some usability testing, get someone to fill in your form while you watch and get them to talk about it. Maybe go as far as 3 people. And then make some changes. You know, testing on its own, we have done nothing today to improve or give any feedback to Central Bedfordshire, even though we've looked at one of their forms. for you, it's like choose a morning every now and then and do some testing, choose a fix, make the fix and repeat. Even fixing that stupid like asterisk in the wrong place would have been an improvement. So it's like just getting into the habit of keeping on top of them, making small fixes, repeating, doing it regularly. That's how you actually get the better forms. So I think I may have used up the whole time. I'm sorry, but we do have time for a couple of questions or thoughts. And I'll be happy to stay on the call for a minute if anyone has some extra questions. Or by all means, I'm always up for answering forms, questions and thoughts. So by all means, feel very welcome to contact me.
Thank you, Caroline. Do you want to share one of those forms jokes?
The one I like the best was published by an actual police department in the US, and it was a citizen's self-arrest form, and it was a form you could use for turning yourself in under a citizen's auto self-arrest. That was great. It's like it had some little lines and it said, place your hand here and repeat after yourself. I arrest myself. It did make me laugh a lot. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, comments, feedback, reflection on this wonderful topic? Like Caroline said at the beginning, this archaic, almost topic of forms.
I was going to say thank you very much. That's a really good. And I think you're right. Most people don't think about forms. They just build them. And just a little bit of thought and testing, I suspect, will make everything a lot better.
Thank you. I think that's why I love that American form, which was asking unuseful questions, because although it looks a lot better, the biggest problem is still there because they've not actually questioned why they're asking the question. You know, they've not thought about why they're asking the questions and what the overall flow is. They've just made it look a lot nicer. I mean, that's nice. I prefer it to look a lot nicer, but it hasn't really hit at the heart of it.
I think we did it. We did it also right on time. Thank you all very much, Caroline. You did it again. This is the second time this year that you've generously volunteered your time. First, it was on surveys earlier this year. Now, I think you changed 30 plus people's way to look at forms. Thank you very much for that. We can't, forms don't look the same anymore.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've got tons of stuff about forms on my website if you'd like to join there, and feel very welcome to ask me questions.
I'll share links and I'll share the slides as well and distribute it to all. So thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you everybody who joined. We made it right on time. Thank you. And remember to, pay your parking from the beginning, Caroline.
I haven't had a parking ticket in years, but I had to choose something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.